Hi everyone, I hope you're all having a great week. This week we are on the final stretch of our move into our new house, and so I thought it would be a good idea for me to keep things as simple and light and relaxing as possible, and so I've decided that I am going to create a neurographic art piece. Since I do have quite a bit on the go, I am feeling a little bit scattered, and I won't lie, I'm not 100% sure where to start. So I decided there's a color that's just laying there on my palette. I'm just going to add a lot of water to it and create a light wash in the background just to get things rolling. A little while back, I created a painting in which I used some masking fluid, and I was told by a few of you, I think, that if I don't want to mess up my brushes, because I had sort of said that it's really not a good idea to use brushes when you're using masking fluid because it can really wreak havoc on your brushes. A few of you mentioned that there is a technique that you can use to actually protect your brushes, and I had never tried it, and so I wasn't really 100% sure how it was done, but I knew it was something to do with dishwashing soap. So I looked it up on YouTube, and as you know, there's a lot of information on YouTube. I was able to find a channel on which the guy showed exactly the whole process. And he said, try it out first with a brush that's not your favorite brush or not your best brush, because you want to make sure that this works. But he did it and it worked, so I went straight for my good brush and gave it a try. And I'm not saying you should necessarily try this, but I kind of was feeling a little bit daring. I don't know if it's the fatigue or or what it is, but anyway, I decided to try it, and I figured, if it worked for him, it probably will work for me, and I'm just going to go ahead and do it with one of my good brushes because I wanted a relatively big brush to cover the circles. Now, the technique I'm using here, where I'm painting in the masking fluid inside the circles, you don't really need to do this with masking fluid, but I wanted to experiment with this technique of trying to protect the brush with the dishwashing soap, and I wanted to see how well it would work, so I thought, why not? And that's why I'm doing it here. But again, you could just simply leave the circles be and paint around them, or you could paint over them. It really is completely up to you. When you're creating, always remember, this is your creative process, and let yourself be guided by your heart, by the call of your soul. So the technique that was described in the video by Fine Liner Nerd was a very simple one. Basically, you have 3 containers. The first in which you put some dishwashing liquid. The second is just a jar of water to rinse your brush after dipping your brush in the dishwashing liquid. And then once you've taken off most of the soap from your brush by just rinsing it in the first jar of water, you start to dip it in your masking fluid, and you keep working until you're ready to stop, and then you rinse your brush in the second jar of water. And once you've done that, you rinse it well, you dab it on your piece of cloth or paper towel or whatever. You should notice that your brush is still fully intact, and it's kind of magical. But I was like so pleasantly surprised by this. My brush actually did not have any of the masking fluid left on it. A huge thank you to everyone who brought this to my attention, and a huge thank you also to Fineliner Nerd for creating a video explaining the whole process. You can catch his video link in my video description down below. Of course, the reason to use masking fluid in the first place is to mask off areas in the painting that you want to protect from the color you're applying. And since I had only really applied a very light wash of color in the background, there's not a whole lot of color in my circles right now. And by protecting them with the masking fluid, I can just add paint over the entire surface of my painting and not worry about going over the lines of my circles and whatnot. Now, usually I really honestly don't worry too much about this. And like I mentioned before, you don't really need to use the masking fluid to do this. It was mostly a chance for me to sort of experiment with that technique to see if I could make it work and protect my brush, and also to give me an opportunity to show those of you who might have been like me and didn't know that you could actually do this and keep your brushes intact. A very important thing to keep in mind when working also with masking fluid is that you absolutely do need to make sure you let the product dry completely before you start painting over it. I've never really tried painting over masking fluid that's not completely dry, but it is very tacky, and my guess is it would probably do a number on your brushes if you did that by accident. So very important to keep in mind to make sure the masking fluid is dry before you start adding more paint layers. And of course, you also need to make sure that your painting is completely dry before you remove the masking fluid from the painting as well. If you don't wait until it's fully dry, there's a good chance your paper will tear as you're removing the masking fluid. I'm feeling very happy with the color I've added so far, so now I'm going to move on to adding a bit of salt to my still damp background, and I'm hoping that that's going to create some interesting marks and some visual texture. I hope that makes sense when I say visual texture. Basically just marks in the paper that will make the painting background look even more interesting. Once I'm done applying this salt, I'll let the background completely dry. And once the background is dry, I'll rub the salt off before moving on to removing the masking fluid. To remove the masking fluid, now that the painting is fully dry, or not the painting, but the painting background is fully dry, I just pulled out a regular eraser and I'm rubbing it over the masking fluid, and as you can see, it is lifting the masking fluid from the paper. Once again, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to make sure the masking fluid is completely dry before trying to do this. Otherwise, there's a chance you might tear some of the paper as you're pulling the masking fluid off. So applying the masking fluid on this painting, like I mentioned before, was not really fully necessary. But I am realizing as I'm doing this that it's also creating a bit of zen in my painting process. I don't know what it is about removing masking fluid from paper, but there's something so satisfying about doing it. It's not something that you can really rush. You kind of have to take your time and rub away at it. But when you're pulling it off the paper and it's leaving that part of the painting masked, I don't know, there's just something very satisfying about that. Now you'll see that I'm also using my finger as I'm doing this, and you can use your fingers, but sometimes you might get some paint on your fingers and that might spread onto the area that you were trying to protect, because of course, as you can see, there is some paint. Although it's dry paint on top of the masking fluid, there is still some paint pigment. And you'll notice that even with the eraser, if the pigment gets on your eraser or on your fingers, then there's a chance you're going to get some of that in the area that you want it to mask. I'm not overly concerned about it for this painting because this was more of an experiment than it really was me fully intending on masking something completely. But if you really did want to make sure something was fully masked, then you have to be very careful about that. And it might be a good idea to maybe take a damp paper towel once the background and the masking fluid are completely dry, and to try and rub off a little bit of that paint pigment off your masking fluid, your layer of masking fluid. You'd have to do so very gently, not to lift the masking fluid, but just to get some of that pigment off before you start rubbing it. And that might actually protect the surface that you want to keep masked. I'll be moving on shortly to adding some more color into my circles, but before I do so, I feel like adding a few more little circles, smaller circles inside of the circles I've already created, just to make them a little bit more interesting. And once I start adding my neurographic lines, I think it'll make these shapes even more interesting and distinct. I had added some yellows and blues and magentas in the background of my painting. And of course, when some of these colors mix, they create greens and they create purples. So I decided I was going to try and experiment with adding purple and green to my circles. It felt like a good idea to start off, especially with the purple. The purple felt like it fit pretty well. But you'll notice when I start to add the green that maybe my green selection was not the very best. Well, maybe neither the purple nor the green works in this painting. And I guess it looks pretty obvious that I really like a challenge. I do love the purple on its own, and I do really like the green I'm about to add on its own. And they do kind of look relatively good together, and we'll kind of go over why. But really, I should have stuck with the colors that are already in the background and just use one of those colors, not mixed in with any of the other colors, just to keep things more coherent. But I didn't do that, so I'm going with what I've started to do, and I'm going to figure out a way to make it work. Okay, brace yourself. Here comes the green. And not just any green. I chose to add green gold. It's one of my favorite golds, or no, one of my favorite greens, I should say. But even if there is some green sort of being created in the background, I don't really feel like this is the right green for this painting in particular, or at least not at this moment. Does anyone else see a certain superhero appearing before them? Okay, maybe not the superhero himself, but on a molecular level, if you're looking at his cells, his blood cells maybe, do you think you might see the Hulk appearing? Oh my goodness. Yeah. So the green, gold, and the purple work really well together because they are complementary colors, and they are very bright, very bold, and they really attract your attention. And it could have worked in another painting. It certainly works well for the Hulk, but that's not really the look I was going for. Not, I guess, that I was really going for a certain look. Especially when I'm experimenting, there's not really anything that's completely defined. So I just kind of go with the flow, and I experiment, and I try things, and I try to make them work. And when they don't fully turn out the way I'm hoping they do, then I have a problem to solve. And in this case, that's what I'm going to be ending up having to do. And that's okay. I love challenging myself that way. Excuse me. I think it's a good way for me to learn how to deal with these types of challenges. I'm also learning a lot when I'm doing this kind of experimentation about what works and what does not work. And I know for a fact now that I will not ever try to create this color combination on top of the background I have right before you, right before my eyes and your eyes. So that's okay. Like I said, we're going to work through it. I'm going to work through it. I'm going to figure out a way to make it work, and hopefully it turns out. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal. The whole point of this process in particular was to do something that was relaxing and fun. And if I start to put too much pressure on myself to make this painting turn into something magically beautiful, then it's gonna make it a lot more stressful, and that's the last thing I want. So I'm choosing to kind of giggle my way through this. I kind of find it a little bit funny that the colors of the Hulk are in front of me, and it's interesting because I never, when I have looked at or watched some of those superhero movies, I've never really thought to myself, oh, I would love to create a painting that reminds me of the Hulk. I really don't know why I went down this road, but I did. So let's see how I can turn it around. I'm starting off by adding some black around my circles to create more contrast, because right now the colors in the painting are not very dark. They are sort of mid-value colors, and so I want to add some darker value in the painting just to help make it more interesting and visually appealing. Now I realize that green and that purple are kind of throwing everything off a little bit, but that's okay. I'm slowly but surely gonna work through it and see if I can turn this around. But in the meantime, I'm adding that black. I do find that even just doing this makes it look slightly better, and I think that's helping me feel a little bit better about where I'm heading, and it's letting my intuition start to kick in and think of other ways that I can start to make some changes to this painting. So I'll keep adding the black around the circles, and then when I'm done doing that, I'll start adding some lines so that I can create using the neurographic art way of creating. When I'm creating neurographic art, I always feel it's important, especially when I'm doing it on a video like this, to mention to people that I sort of have my own way of creating what I consider to be neurographic art. It doesn't follow the quote-unquote rules of neurographic art, and that's because I'm not a huge fan of following rules, especially in my creative process. So I feel that it's important for me to be able to use neurographic art in a relaxing way, in a way that can help me de-stress and find some moments of zen when I'm going through some either stressful or challenging times. And so I prefer to just do things in my own way, and I always feel a need to sort of preface the process with the fact that I'm not doing it exactly the way neurographic art is prescribed, if you will. I do it the way that feels the best for me. And I try to encourage people when you're creating, especially if this is not something that's a part of a therapeutic process for you, if you are like me and you're using art in a therapeutic way, but you're not necessarily being followed by a therapist, and you're not, trying to do something specific where you're digging deep into certain issues you may be facing, then I try to encourage people to let loose and do things the way that it feels right for you to do them. And that's what I'm choosing to do here. I'm creating neurographic art in a way that I find relaxing and in a way that I find enjoyable. And it's not going to look exactly like what some other neurographic art pieces might look like. And for me, that's completely okay. If you're new to neurographic art and you're not 100% sure what it is I'm talking about or what it is I'm doing right now, I have a number of videos on the process, especially on the way I create neurographic art, and I'll link these videos in my video description down below. The short of it is that I am basically looking at all of the areas in my painting where I've created lines, and these lines are intersecting. Where the lines are intersecting, you will notice that it creates sort of an X, and where these X's or these lines are connecting at the X, it creates like a little bit of a pointy shape. And as I'm going along, this is something that I am borrowing from neurographic art, I am rounding off those areas so that they are not sharp. So I'm creating rounded corners instead of having sharp, pointy corners. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're not 100% sure, please check my video description to see some of the other videos where I go into a little bit more detail about this. After I've rounded off all of my intersecting lines, I like to come in and color those areas in with my brush pen. And I like to use a brush pen for a number of different reasons. The first is that it works very well at covering relatively big areas relatively quickly. I used to do this with my fountain pen, and I found that it took quite a bit of time, and sometimes the tip of my fountain pen would also get clogged and make it a little bit more challenging. With my brush pen, I never have to worry about this. So I love to use the brush pen for that reason. And the second reason I love using a brush pen in this type of scenario is that over watercolor paper, I don't have to worry about ruining the tip of my brush pen because it's bristle, very much like my watercolor brushes, and so it handles the rough texture of the watercolor paper really, really well. I'm still feeling a little, oh, okay, a lot stumped by the purple and green. So I'm going to go with my Star Gold and see if I can't find a way to draw attention away from those two colors and maybe tone them down a little bit. The gold seems to be helping at least a little bit because it's drawing some of that golden color from the green gold into the background of the painting as well. But it doesn't feel like quite enough just yet. So I'm gonna keep trying to see what else I can do. Okay, now that I am actually really starting to like. I love the addition of that star gold on top of the green gold. It's not, making the painting completely turn around and become something magically beautiful just yet. But there is something to be said about adding that gold into the center of the green gold. First of all, it kind of pushes the green gold back a little bit. And it also ties in with the gold that I created in the background. So I think I'm heading in the right direction. I could have stuck with adding more gold, especially in those green gold sections, and I probably will do that, but I'm kind of feeling a little antsy to try adding some magic green into the purple sections to see what will happen when I do that. I'm not nearly as wowed with the addition of the magic green to the purple as I was the star gold over top of the green gold, but I do think it is a step in the right direction. For one, it's adding a little bit of light contrast into the painting, and I think that's a good thing. I also think when that green gold, or not, sorry, the magic green catches the light, that it will look very pretty against that purple. So I'm going to keep working on that, and I'm going to keep adding this magic green to the purple sections, and I'll also add some more star gold to the green gold sections. Well, it's not perfect, but is anything ever perfect? No, I don't think so. So I am actually quite happy with the direction it's heading. It's not, my most wow painting I think I've ever created, but I am really liking how it's changing as I'm continuing to work on it. And so I'm proving to myself that I can find solutions to even the crazy problem of the Hulk showing up in a in a painting session. And I am starting to like this painting quite a bit more. I want to add some vertical lines in my painting, but I don't want to add them everywhere. I just sort of want to delineate where I want to add them. So I've pulled out my mechanical pencil and I'm drawing within each of the exterior shapes. I'm drawing in some lines to sort of delineate where I will create those vertical lines. Since my intention is to come back and erase those pencil lines once I'm done adding my vertical lines with my pen, I am making sure I don't apply too much pressure on my pencil tip because I want to keep the lines light enough that I can erase them easily. I'm also going to use my ruler along with my fine tip pen to create some guidelines in ink that I can use to keep my lines relatively vertical. I'm not looking to create quote unquote perfect lines. Don't believe in perfection, and I actually really do like the look of organic lines. But sometimes if you don't have a guide, it can lead to your lines all being slanted in one direction. And if that's the look you're going for, that is fantastic. But that's not necessarily the look that I want to go for. So by creating these little lines, I'm giving myself a visual guide that I can follow to try and keep my lines relatively parallel. So I created some very faint guidelines with my pencil, and they were so faint that I didn't see them, and I completely used my ink over them. And that is okay. That just means that that's what was meant to happen in this section of the painting. And so the best way, I guess, to quote unquote correct this, I'm not really even feeling like I need to correct it, is just to repeat that same thing somewhere else in the painting to make sure that it looks a little bit more cohesive. But I'm not going to stop doing what I had intended to do. I am going to keep doing that in other sections of the painting. So the painting will be cohesive in the fact that there are elements that are repeating in different areas of the painting. I'm feeling as though the vertical lines are not quite as visible, I guess, as I would like them to be. And so I've decided to bring in my fountain pen and add a few little dots at the end of each of the lines just to bring a little bit more attention to them. They're still going to be pretty subtle in the painting, but I do think that adding those little dots will add a little bit more visual interest. So it may not be my very favorite color combination in a painting, but I will say this, I had quite a bit of fun creating this painting because when the Hulk appeared in color in my painting, it was an interesting challenge that I was faced with, and it kind of made me giggle because, you know, like I said, it's never been my intention to create a painting really using these colors, and I sort of accidentally ended up going in that direction because I was feeling like experimenting, and that's part of the experimentation process. Like sometimes it really works out and you discover something absolutely magical, and other times you find yourself with a little challenge that you have to work with. And when these challenges come up, and they will, because that's the creative process, it's good to have a chance to work through it. You know, now looking at it with the tape pulled off and moving in a little bit closer to look at the details, I actually really love a lot of different parts of this painting. And even if the whole doesn't necessarily work completely, there are certainly little gems in this painting, and I really enjoyed creating it. And in the end, isn't that what matters the most? And with that said, I believe I have accomplished my mission of keeping this process fun, relaxing, and enjoyable. I really enjoyed playing with the Hulk. Oh my goodness. I really do love how that magic green looks against the purple. I love that star gold against the green gold. And even if the color combinations as a whole are not my favorite, I do really find that there are elements of this painting that make me smile. And I'm happy I was able to create it for you. Thank you again for joining me on my creative journey. I hope you enjoyed watching this process and maybe had a few giggles with me. And most of all, I hope you have a wonderful week and wish you happy creating.